The morning started like any other day in the Luna mining station above Earth. Workers were having their breakfast and getting ready for another day of mining operations in space. Commander Hyansik was drinking his coffee while reading reports from different mining colonies around Earth orbit. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. Then the alarm started screaming. Hyansik dropped his coffee cup and ran to the main control room. On the massive screens in front of him, he could see something that made his blood freeze. Huge alien ships were appearing from nowhere around Earth. These ships were not like anything humans had ever seen before. They were dark red like blood, and covered with sharp points and weapons that glowed with dangerous energy. The ships belonged to the Valkyrie Empire. The Valkyrie were tall, lizard-like aliens with scales that changed colors like oil on water. They had been part of the Galactic community for thousands of years and were known for being very aggressive and cruel. But humans had never fought with them before. Earth had always tried to be peaceful with all alien races. The Valkyrie ships surrounded every human colony and mining station in Earth orbit. There were 50 stations with millions of people living and working in them. These people were not soldiers. They were miners, engineers, teachers, doctors, and families with children. They had no weapons to fight with and no way to escape, Commander. Hyansik tried to contact Earth to ask for help. He also tried to talk to the Valkyrie ships to ask what they wanted. But before he could get any answers, something terrible started happening. The largest Valkyrie ship sent out a message that was broadcast to every human colony, every Earth city, and every communication device in the solar system. The message came from General Vexval, the leader of the Valkyrie invasion force. His voice was cold and harsh like metal scraping on stone. "Humans of Earth," the alien general said, "your species has refused to surrender your home world to the Galactic Empire. You have been too proud and stubborn. Now you will learn what happens to species who do not obey. We will execute 50 million of your colonists. Every alien species in the galaxy will watch. This will teach everyone what happens when you refuse to submit to your betters." Hyansik felt sick to his stomach. 50 million people. That was almost everyone living in the orbital colonies. Men, women, children, elderly people. All of them were about to die just to make a point to the galaxy. The executions began within 2 hours of the announcement. The Valkyrie soldiers moved through the colonies like deadly machines. They gathered people from their homes, their workplaces, their schools. They did not care if someone was a baby or an old grandmother. They did not care if families begged to stay together. They just grabbed people and dragged them to large open areas where they had built gallows from pieces of destroyed human buildings. The worst part was that everything was broadcast live across the galaxy. Billions of aliens from hundreds of different species were watching as humans died. The Valkyrie wanted everyone to see what happened when you did not follow their rules. On Earth, people gathered around television screens in homes, schools, offices, and public places. They watched in horror as their fellow humans were murdered in space. President Park Min-ho was in the Emergency Command Center in Seoul trying to organize some kind of rescue mission. But Earth's military was too small and too far away. They could not reach the colonies in time to save anyone. The executions went on for days. The Valkyrie were very organized about it. They killed people in groups of 1,000. They made sure the cameras captured every moment. They wanted the galaxy to see human faces filled with fear and desperation. They wanted everyone to hear the crying and begging, but something unexpected happened as people on Earth watched their loved ones die. Instead of becoming scared and wanting to surrender, they became angry. Not just angry, but filled with a cold fury that grew stronger with every death they witnessed. In the early days of the executions, people were crying and praying for the victims. But by the end of the first week, the crying had stopped. Instead, there was silence, a terrible, dangerous silence. People were memorizing the faces of every Valkyrie soldier they saw on the broadcasts. They were studying the alien weapons and ships. They were learning everything they could about their enemies. Phone calls started flooding into military recruitment centers. Factories that made civilian goods began asking if they could switch to making weapons and military equipment. Scientists who had spent their careers studying peaceful things like medicine and agriculture started volunteering to work on military projects. Dr. Kim Yuna was one of these scientists. She had been working on alien biology to help humans understand other species better. Now she was volunteering to study alien biology to find ways to hurt other species. Her gentle face had become hard and determined as she watched the broadcasts. The executions continued for 3 weeks. Every day brought fresh horrors. Children were separated from their parents. Elderly people who could barely walk were forced to climb onto the gallows. Young couples held hands as they waited to die. The Valkyrie showed no mercy to anyone. Commander Hyunsik was executed on the 15th day along with his entire crew. Before he died, he managed to send one final message to Earth. It was just 3 words: remember us all. By the end of the 3 weeks, 50 million humans had been murdered. The Valkyrie left their bodies hanging in space as a warning. The orbital colonies that had once been full of life and hope were now filled with the dead. General Val made one final broadcast to announce that the executions were complete. He warned Earth that if they continued to refuse surrender, more colonies would be destroyed. Then the Valkyrie fleet left the solar system, leaving behind only death and destruction. But they had made a terrible mistake. They thought that killing millions of humans would make the survivors afraid. Instead, it made them into something far more dangerous. It made them into a species with nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. On Earth, President Park Min-ho stood before cameras to address his people and the galaxy. His voice was calm, but his eyes were filled with the same cold fury that had infected every human on the planet. Today, 50 million of our people were murdered by alien soldiers, he said. They died not because they were warriors or criminals. They died because they were human. The galaxy has shown us that they see us as less than animals. They have taught us that mercy is weakness, and that peace is just another word for surrender. He paused and looked directly into the camera. We have learned this lesson well. Now we will teach it back to our teachers. Earth hereby declares that a state of genocide exists between humanity and those who would destroy us. We will not rest until every single being responsible for these murders has paid the price for their crimes. The broadcast ended, and the real war began. Dr. Kim Yuna had been one of the most gentle people on Earth. She spent her life studying alien animals and plants to help humans understand other species better. She loved learning about how different alien bodies worked and always talked about peace between all species in the galaxy. But now she stood in a secret, underground laboratory looking at a dead Valkyrie soldier on a metal table. Her eyes were cold and focused as she cut into the alien body with precise movements. She was no longer studying aliens to understand them. She was studying them to kill them. The Valkyrie soldier had been captured during a small raid on one of their ships. The human soldiers who brought the body to her laboratory said nothing when they delivered it. Everyone knew what she was doing, but no one talked about it openly. They called it Project Nemesis, and it was the most secret program on Earth. Yuna worked day and night examining every part of the alien body. She studied the Valkyrie blood, their organs, their nervous system, and their DNA. She was looking for weaknesses that humans could exploit. She was designing diseases and toxins that would kill Valkyrie but not hurt humans or other species. While Yuna worked in her laboratory, similar changes were happening all over Earth. General Lee Tiemann had been known as a peaceful man who always preferred talking to fighting. Before the massacre, he had been the leader of Earth's diplomatic military forces. Now he was in charge of the largest military buildup in human history. Every factory on Earth had stopped making civilian goods. Car factories were making tanks and military vehicles. Electronics companies were making weapons and communication equipment. Clothing factories were making military uniforms and armor. Even toy companies were making parts for military equipment. The transformation was not just happening on Earth. Human colonies on Mars, the Moon, and asteroid mining stations were also changing everything they did. Mars had been focused on terraforming. and growing food for Earth. Now the Martian colonies were building weapons factories and training military units. The asteroid mining stations stopped mining metals for construction and started mining materials for explosives and armor. The peaceful trade ships that moved goods between human colonies were being converted into warships. Everything humans had built for peace was being turned into tools for war. General Lee Tiemann stood in the new Global Military Command Center that had been built deep underground in the mountains of South Korea. Around him were hundreds of screens showing military operations all over the solar system. Every day, more weapons were being produced. Every day, more soldiers were being trained, but the most important change was happening in the minds of ordinary people. Before the massacre, humans had dreams about exploring the galaxy and making friends with alien species. They wanted to learn about alien cultures and share human art and music with other species. Now those dreams were gone, replaced by cold anger and a desire for revenge that grew stronger every day. Children in schools were learning about alien anatomy and military tactics instead of alien languages and cultures. University students were studying weapons engineering instead of xenobiology. Artists were creating propaganda instead of beautiful paintings. The first human warships began coming out of the shipyards. 6 months after the massacre, these ships looked nothing like the elegant alien vessels that moved through space like graceful birds. Human warships were ugly and angular like metal boxes covered with weapons. They were designed for one purpose only: to kill aliens as efficiently as possible. The ships had names that reflected humanity's new attitude: USS Vengeance, USS Never Forget, USS Retribution, USS Blood Price. Each ship carried images of the executed colonists painted on their hulls. Every human soldier could see the faces of the dead whenever they went into battle. Captain Shin Jae-won was put in command of the first battle fleet. He had been a cargo ship captain before the massacre, moving supplies between colonies. Now he commanded 300 warships armed with weapons that had never been tested in real combat. He spent his days training his crews for the war that everyone knew was coming. Intelligence networks that had once been used for peaceful communication with aliens were turned into spy operations. Human agents began infiltrating alien worlds to learn about their defenses and weaknesses. They studied alien psychology to understand what would frighten them most. They learned about alien families and cultures not to appreciate them but to find ways to destroy them. The most frightening change was in human culture itself. Before the massacre, humans had valued mercy, forgiveness, and peaceful solutions to problems. They believed that violence should always be the last choice and that everyone deserved a second chance. Now those values were seen as weakness. The new human culture valued strength, revenge, and total victory over enemies. Humans began to believe that showing mercy to enemies was the same as betraying the memory of the 50 million dead. They convinced themselves that the only way to honor their murdered families was to make their killers suffer. Dr. Yuna finished her work on the biological weapons after 8 months of constant research. She had created viruses and toxins that would kill Valkyrie slowly and painfully. But more importantly, she had designed biological agents that would prevent Valkyrie from having healthy children. The weapons would not just kill the current generation of aliens. They would make sure that fewer and fewer Valkyrie would be born in the future. When General Lee Tiemann saw the test results from Yuna's weapons, he smiled for the first time since the massacre. The smile was not happy or warm. It was cold and cruel, like the smile of a predator that had cornered its prey. The galaxy had taught humanity that the universe was a place where the strong killed the weak without mercy. They had taught humans that peaceful species were just victims waiting to be slaughtered. They had shown humans what happened to civilizations that trusted in diplomacy and kindness. Humanity had learned these lessons very well. Now they were ready to teach them back to their teachers. Captain Shin Jae-won sat in the command chair of the UES Reckoning as his ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Valkyrie territory. Around him, 300 human warships appeared from the darkness of space like metal ghosts returning from the dead. This was humanity's first major attack against the aliens who had murdered their families. The Valkyrie homeworld called Kethmar hung in space in front of them like a blue and green jewel. Jaewon could see the lights of huge cities on the planet's surface where billions of Valkyrie lived their daily lives. For a moment he almost felt sorry for them. They had no idea what was about to happen to their world. Then he remembered the images of human children hanging from alien gallows, and his heart became hard as stone again. The Valkyrie had shown no mercy to innocent humans. Now humans would show no mercy to them. The attack began exactly as planned. Human ships were smaller and faster than Valkyrie vessels, but they had better weapons and tactics. The human fleet split into dozens of smaller groups that swarmed through the Valkyrie defense systems. Like angry bees attacking a giant animal, human weapons had been designed specifically to hurt Valkyrie as much as possible. Sonic cannons that used sound waves to damage Valkyrie hearing and cause terrible pain. Gas weapons that triggered ancient Valkyrie fears and made them panic. Kinetic bombs that smashed Valkyrie cities into piles of broken stone and metal. But this was not just about destroying buildings and military bases. Colonel Yang Minji led the ground assault teams that landed on Kethmar after the initial bombardment. These soldiers had been trained to feel no sympathy or mercy for their enemies. They moved through Valkyrie cities like silent shadows, targeting not just military installations, but also places that were important to Valkyrie culture. Valkyrie museums were burned to ash. Art galleries that contained thousands of years of alien culture were destroyed. Libraries that held the wisdom and history of the Valkyrie species were reduced to smoking ruins. The humans wanted to hurt more than just Valkyrie bodies. They wanted to destroy the Valkyrie soul. The most terrible weapon was invisible. Dr. Kim Yuna's biological weapon was released into Kethmar's atmosphere through tiny droplets that looked like harmless rain. The Valkyrie who breathed the contaminated air did not die immediately. Instead, the weapon attacked their reproductive systems, making it harder and harder for them to have healthy children. It was a death sentence that would take decades to complete. Future generations of Valkyrie would become smaller and weaker. Fewer children would be born each year. The proud Valkyrie species would slowly fade away, giving them plenty of time to understand exactly what they had brought upon themselves. As the human fleet prepared to leave Kethmar, they broadcast a message to every communication system on the planet. The message was recorded by President Park Min-ho and translated into the Valkyrie language. His voice was calm and cold as he spoke to the surviving aliens. "This is just the beginning," the message said. "For every human murdered in the massacre, one Valkyrie world will burn. We have a list of 50 million Valkyrie targets. We will hunt down every single one. Your military, your government, your families, your children. None of you will escape the price of your crimes." The message continued with specific details about other Valkyrie colonies and military bases that humans were planning to attack. The humans wanted the Valkyrie to know exactly what was coming. They wanted them to live in fear and desperation just as humans had felt when they watched their loved ones die. The attack on Kethmar lasted only 18 hours, but the destruction was total. Valkyrie military forces were scattered and broken. Their cities were in ruins. Their people were infected with a slow-acting plague that would kill their species over time. Most importantly, their confidence was shattered. When news of the Kethmar attack reached other parts of the galaxy, alien species that had never cared about human affairs suddenly became very interested in what humans were doing. Intelligence. Reports began flowing in from across known space. Human ships had been spotted in dozens of star systems, not attacking but just watching and studying. The aliens began to realize that humanity's war was not limited to the Valkyrie. Every species that had remained silent during the massacre of 50 million humans was now a potential target. The humans were making lists of enemies and studying their weaknesses just as they had done with the Valkyrie. What frightened the galaxy most was not human brutality but human efficiency. The humans were not acting like angry animals seeking revenge. They were acting like cold machines that had calculated the exact cost of their enemies' crimes and were methodically collecting payment. Human soldiers did not seem to enjoy killing. They did not celebrate their victories or take pleasure in their enemies' suffering. They just did their jobs with the same professional focus that they had once used to build cities and cure diseases. They had turned warfare into an industrial process. The galaxy had seen many wars throughout its long history. Species fought for territory, resources, or political power. But humanity was fighting for something different. They were fighting for justice. And justice, unlike other motivations for war, did not allow for mercy or compromise. As Captain Shin Jae-won's fleet jumped back into hyperspace heading for their next target, he looked at the tactical displays, showing dozens of other human fleets moving toward Valkyrie colonies throughout the galaxy. Each fleet carried enough firepower to destroy entire worlds. The Valkyrie had tried to teach humanity a lesson about the dangers of defying superior alien civilizations. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. They had created a species that viewed warfare not as a political tool, but as a moral obligation. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you taught humans that the universe was ruled by violence and cruelty. Humans were very good students, and now class was in session. Ambassador Cho Yoonji stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, her black military uniform making her look like a dark shadow among the colorful representatives of 1,000 alien species. Once she had been Earth's voice of peace and friendship with other species. Now she was humanity's messenger of war and judgment. The massive chamber was filled with aliens of every shape and size imaginable. Some looked like giant insects with multiple arms and eyes. Others were made of living crystal that sparkled in the light. Some were gaseous beings that floated in special containment fields. All of them were staring at the human woman with a mixture of fear and anger. Yoonji walked calmly to the center of the chamber and placed a small data storage device on the speaking platform. The device contained video recordings from the recent attack on Kethmar and dozens of other Valkyrie worlds that had been destroyed by human forces over the past 6 months. "Honored delegates," Yoonji said in a voice that carried clearly through the chamber's sound system, "I bring greetings from the Human Protectorate and a progress report on our ongoing military operations against those who participated in the genocide of 50 million human civilians." She activated the data device and holographic images filled the air above the assembled delegates. The images showed Valkyrie cities burning, Valkyrie military bases reduced to glass craters, and Valkyrie civilians fleeing in terror as human soldiers moved through their streets with mechanical precision. But the most disturbing images were of the human soldiers themselves. Their faces showed no emotion, no anger, no satisfaction. They just did their work with the same professional focus that other people might use to repair machinery or harvest crops. They had turned the destruction of entire civilizations into a routine job. 50 Valkyrie worlds have been completely destroyed, Yoonji announced. Our military analysts estimate that another 200 Valkyrie colonies will be eliminated within the next 12 months. This is not a negotiation. This is mathematics. 50 million humans died. Therefore, 50 million Valkyrie must die, along with anyone who chooses to interfere with our justice. The chamber erupted in outraged voices speaking hundreds of different languages. Some delegates demanded that the council impose economic sanctions on humanity. Others called for military intervention to stop the human rampage. A few species even suggested that humanity should be completely eliminated before they could threaten the entire galaxy. But underneath the outrage was something much more dangerous: fear. Intelligence reports had been flooding in from across known space. Human ships had been detected in star systems belonging to dozens of different species. The ships were not attacking, just observing and studying, learning about defenses, cataloging weaknesses, making lists. The Zephyrian delegate, a tall, bird-like creature with bright blue feathers, stood up to address Yoonji directly. "Your species has gone mad with bloodlust," he screeched. You cannot destroy entire civilizations just because you are angry about one military action. Yunji turned to look at the Zephyrian with cold eyes. You are incorrect, Delegate. This was not one military action. Our intelligence networks have uncovered the complete truth about the massacre. 17 different species were involved in planning and executing the genocide of our colonists. The Valkyrie were just the ones who pulled the triggers. She activated another set of holographic displays that showed intercepted communications between various alien governments. The messages revealed a conspiracy that had been planned for months before the massacre. Multiple species had agreed that humanity was growing too fast and becoming too powerful. They had decided to eliminate the human threat before it could spread further into the galaxy. The massacre was a test, Yunji continued. You wanted to see how humans would respond to overwhelming force. You wanted to know if we would surrender our independence and accept alien rule. Well, now you have your answer. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. Species that had considered themselves neutral in the conflict suddenly realized they might be on humanity's target list. Others began looking suspiciously at their neighbors, wondering which species had been secretly involved in the anti-human conspiracy. The crystalline delegate, speaking through a translation device, asked the question that everyone was thinking. What do you want from us? What will it take to end this war? Yunji smiled, but it was not a warm or friendly expression. We want understanding. We want every species in this galaxy to understand exactly what you taught us. You taught us that mercy is weakness. You taught us that peaceful species exist only to be victims. You taught us that the only way to ensure survival is to be stronger and more ruthless than everyone else. She gestured to the images still floating in the air around them. We are simply applying the lessons you provided. Every alien child who dies in our attacks is learning the same lesson that our children learned when you murdered them. Every alien parent who watches their family executed is experiencing the same education that our parents received during your broadcasts. The Flothery delegate, a peaceful species known throughout the galaxy for their philosophy of nonviolence, pleaded desperately. Surely there must be some way to end this cycle of violence. Revenge will only create more revenge. When will it stop? It will stop when we decide it has stopped, Yunji replied. You see, that is another lesson you taught us. The strong decide when violence begins and when it ends. The weak simply endure whatever the strong choose to do to them. You have shown us very clearly which category humanity belongs in. As the session continued, more intelligence reports arrived. Human fleets were massing near the borders of multiple star systems. Ground assault forces were being staged on human military bases throughout the galaxy. The Biological Warfare Division had developed new weapons targeting specific alien species that had been identified as part of the conspiracy, but perhaps most terrifying was the psychological warfare campaign. Human agents had infiltrated alien communication networks and were spreading carefully crafted propaganda designed to create panic and distrust. Alien species were beginning to turn against each other, suspicious that their neighbors might be secretly allied with the humans. Trade routes that had existed for thousands of years were breaking down as species refused to work with potential human allies. Military alliances that had maintained galactic peace for centuries were fracturing under the pressure of suspicion and fear. The galaxy was tearing itself apart from the inside. The session ended with no resolutions and no agreements. As Yunji prepared to leave, she made one final statement that sent chills through every delegate present. A coalition of alien military forces is currently assembling to attack the Sol system, she said calmly. We are aware of your plans and we welcome your assault. It will provide us with an opportunity to demonstrate some of our new weapons technologies. We look forward to showing the galaxy what happens when you bring conventional warfare against a species that has embraced total warfare. As she walked out of the chamber, the alien delegates sat in stunned silence. They had created something that they could not control or contain. Humanity had become the nightmare that haunted every species across the stars, and the nightmare was just getting started. Fleet Admiral Park Sun-hee stood in the command center buried deep beneath the mountains of Tibet, surrounded by holographic displays that showed human military operations across dozens of star systems. 10 months had passed since the first revenge attack on Kethmer, and the results were better than anyone had dared to hope. Valkyrie resistance had collapsed completely. Their military was reduced to small groups of survivors hiding in asteroid fields and abandoned space stations. 47 Valkyrie worlds had been destroyed, and their population had dropped from billions to millions. The biological weapons were working exactly as designed, causing fewer Valkyrie children to be born each month, but destroying the Valkyrie was no longer enough. The intelligence networks had uncovered the full truth about the conspiracy against humanity. The massacre had not been a spontaneous act of cruelty. It had been carefully planned by 17 different alien species who were worried about human expansion into the galaxy. The conspiracy had been led by the Hegemony, a group of the oldest and most powerful alien civilizations. They had decided that humanity was growing too fast and becoming too independent. The massacre was supposed to break human confidence and force Earth to accept alien oversight. Instead, it had created something far more dangerous. Dr. Choi Hyun-jin had been working around the clock in her biological warfare laboratory, developing new weapons for each species that had participated in the conspiracy. Unlike the slow-acting Valkyrie plague, these new weapons were designed for rapid spread and devastating effect. Each virus was tailored to the specific biology of its target species. The Zephyrians would die from respiratory failure as their lung systems shut down. The crystalline entities would suffer as their molecular bonds dissolved. The gaseous nebulites would lose cohesion and disperse into space. Every conspirator species would face extinction through weapons designed specifically for their unique biology. Meanwhile, the human fleet had grown from hundreds to thousands of warships. Every shipyard in human space was working at maximum capacity, producing vessels that were more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Months of total warfare had forced rapid advancement in every field of science and technology. Human weapons were now generations beyond alien technology. Human ships were faster, more maneuverable, and carried more firepower than vessels twice their size. Human soldiers were equipped with armor and weapons that made them nearly invincible in ground combat. The peaceful species that had reached for the stars in wonder had become the most efficient killing machine the galaxy had ever produced. The Psychological Warfare Division, led by Lieutenant Colonel Nam So-young, had achieved victories that were almost as important as the military ones. Through careful manipulation of alien communication networks, they had managed to turn different species against each other. The galaxy was consuming itself with paranoia and distrust. Species that had been allies for centuries were now suspicious of each other's motives. Trade agreements were being canceled. Military alliances were dissolving. Some alien civilizations were even fighting small wars with each other as they accused their neighbors of being secretly allied with humanity, but the humans were not satisfied with just military victory. They wanted every alien species to feel the same helpless terror that human parents had experienced while watching their children die. Operation Harvest began simultaneously across 50 worlds, targeting the families of alien leaders and military commanders. Human strike teams captured alien civilians and broadcast their executions on every communication channel in the galaxy, just as the Valkyrie had done to humans. The message was clear and simple. This is what you taught us. This is what you created, and this is what you deserve. The psychological impact was devastating. Alien species that had never feared anything suddenly found themselves terrified of humans. Parents kept their children hidden. Military officers resigned rather than risk their families becoming targets. Entire alien civilizations began changing their behavior. Just to avoid attracting human attention, the galaxy's response was swift but desperate. Over 300 species formed the largest military alliance in known history. They assembled a fleet of 10,000 warships and began moving toward the Sol system, determined to destroy humanity before the human war machine could consume everything. The alien coalition was confident in their overwhelming numerical superiority. They had more ships, more soldiers, and more experience in large-scale warfare. They believed that humanity's early victories were just the result of surprise and superior technology. They were certain that sheer numbers would eventually triumph over human innovation, but they fundamentally misunderstood what they were fighting against. This was not a war of conquest where the victor would rule over the defeated. This was a war of extermination where the only acceptable outcome was the complete destruction of the enemy. Humans did not want to rule the galaxy. They wanted to punish it. Admiral Park Sun-hee smiled as she watched the tactical displays showing the massive alien fleet approaching human space. Her staff officers were making final preparations for the defensive Sol system. Every human world, every space station, every asteroid had been converted into a weapon platform. The entire solar system had become a trap waiting to spring. "Let them come," she said quietly to her subordinates. "They want to see what humanity has become. They want to know if we are still the peaceful species they remember from before the massacre. We will show them exactly what 50 million murdered innocents have taught us about the nature of justice." The approaching alien fleet represented the combined military might of hundreds of civilizations. It was the largest concentration of force that the galaxy had ever assembled. The aliens believed that such overwhelming power would finally end the human threat once and for all. They had no idea that they were about to participate in their own execution. Humanity had spent months preparing for this moment, and they were ready to demonstrate to the galaxy. What happened when you tried to destroy a species that refused to die quietly? The battle that would determine the future of galactic civilization was about to begin, and humanity intended to make sure that it would also be the last battle that anyone would ever need to fight. The Battle of Sol began when the massive alien coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace expecting to find a desperate human homeworld preparing for its last stand. Instead, they discovered that they had flown directly into the most sophisticated trap in military history. The entire solar system had been converted into a weapon platform of unimaginable scale. Admiral Kong Minsu watched from the bridge of the command ship as 10,000 alien vessels spread out across the solar system. The enemy fleet was impressive in size, but the aliens had made a fatal error in their planning. They had brought overwhelming numbers to fight a species that no longer cared about fighting fair. Every asteroid in the solar system had been hollowed out and filled with weapons. Every moon had been converted into a missile battery. Every piece of space debris had been turned into a guided projectile. The planets themselves were surrounded by defensive grids that could destroy capital ships with single shots. But the most devastating surprise was not visible to alien sensors. Humanity had developed new weapons technologies that were decades beyond anything the galaxy possessed. Gravitational manipulation devices that could crush alien ships like tin cans. Quantum disruption beams that could make enemy vessels simply cease to exist. Temporal distortion fields that could age alien crews to death in seconds. The first phase of the battle lasted only 3 hours. Human weapon systems activated simultaneously throughout the solar system, catching the alien fleet completely by surprise. Alien warships that had taken years to build were destroyed in moments by weapons they could not understand or defend against. The alien commanders tried to organize a retreat but discovered that humanity had prepared for that possibility as well. Human ships had been waiting in hyperspace around every possible escape route. As alien vessels tried to flee the solar system, they found themselves trapped in a series of ambush that turned their organized withdrawal into a panicked rout. The second phase began when Dr. Kim Yuna activated the Soul Plague, a modified version of her biological weapons program that could target multiple species simultaneously. The airborne pathogen was released through the life support systems of every alien ship in the solar system. As enemy crews began dying aboard their own vessels, panic spread faster than the disease itself. Alien ships began firing on each other in their desperation to escape the infected zones. Command structures broke down as officers died at their posts. Some ships tried to ram human positions in suicide attacks. Others simply drifted powerlessly through space as their entire crews succumbed to the biological agents. The third and final phase was the pursuit. Human fleets that had been held in reserve throughout the solar system began hunting down the scattered remnants of the alien coalition. They followed the fleeing enemies across dozens of star systems, destroying them methodically and without mercy, but humanity's true victory was not achieved through superior firepower or advanced technology. It was achieved through the complete transformation of galactic civilization's understanding of warfare itself. The aliens had brought conventional military thinking to fight against a species that had rejected all conventional limitations on violence. The galaxy had operated for thousands of years under the assumption that wars could be fought with rules, that there were limits to how far civilized species would go to achieve their goals. Humanity had proven this assumption completely false. They had demonstrated that a sufficiently motivated species could wage war so efficiently and brutally that surrender became meaningless. In the aftermath of the Battle of Sol, as human fleets occupied the capital worlds of dozens of species, a new order began to emerge throughout the galaxy. The Galactic Council was dissolved and replaced by the Human Protectorate. Alien species found themselves subject to human law, human justice, and human concepts of appropriate punishment. The 17 species that had participated in the original conspiracy faced systematic extinction through carefully targeted biological weapons. Their populations declined rapidly as the diseases spread through their homeworlds. Within a few years, these species existed only in small numbers in isolated colonies, serving as examples of what happened to those who chose to make war against humanity. Species that had remained neutral during the conspiracy were allowed to continue existing under human oversight. They were required to accept human military bases on their worlds and to follow human regulations regarding military development and population growth. Their children learned human history and human values in their schools. The few alien species that had actually opposed the massacre from the beginning were granted limited autonomy as a reward for their moral courage. They became junior partners in the new galactic government, helping to administrate the human empire while always remembering who held ultimate authority. President Park Min-ho addressed the new Galactic Assembly from his office in Geneva, speaking to representatives of 1,000 species who now served at humanity's pleasure. His words were broadcast to every inhabited world in known space, translated into every alien language. "We did not choose this war," he said calmly. "We did not want to become the rulers of the galaxy. We were a peaceful species who dreamed of friendship and cooperation with our alien neighbors. You destroyed those dreams when you decided to teach us that the universe was ruled by violence and cruelty." He paused and looked directly into the camera, his eyes reflecting the cold determination that had driven humanity through months of total warfare. "You have created something that did not exist before in galactic history. You have created a species that views justice not as an ideal to aspire to, but as a debt that must be paid in full. Every human child now learns that mercy toward enemies is the same as betrayal of the innocent. Every human adult now understands that peace can only be maintained through the constant threat of overwhelming force." The broadcast continued with detailed explanations of the new galactic order. Alien species would be allowed to maintain their cultures and traditions as long as they did not conflict with human values. They could govern themselves locally, but all major decisions would require human approval. They could develop technology, but not weapons that might threaten human security. Most importantly, they would never be allowed to forget the lessons of the war. Memorial sites would be built on every alien world to commemorate the 50 million humans who had died in the massacre. Alien children would learn about human history and the consequences of choosing violence against innocent people. As President Park Min-ho concluded his address, he reflected on what humanity had become during the long months of warfare. They were no longer the same species that had once reached for the stars with wonder and hope. The massacre had killed that version of humanity along with 50 million colonists, What had emerged from the ashes was something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. They had become the galaxy's judge and executioner, its teacher and its ruler. They had learned that sometimes salvation could only come through conquest, and that peace could only be maintained through the absolute certainty of swift and terrible retribution against those who would disturb it. The galaxy had taught humanity that the universe was a place where the strong preyed upon the weak without mercy or restraint. Humanity had learned that lesson perfectly. Now they were teaching it back to their teachers with interest compounded over centuries of future galactic history.